Hi, today I'm going to show you how to do an easy eyelet stitch scarf. It's worked on a flat panel, as a flat panel. I'm working with the CinDWood square afghan loom using 14 pegs. This loom has the 5/8 inch gauge. The yarn I'm using today, or with this scarf, is Loops and Thread Charisma yarn. The color is Bouquet. This yarn is carried by Michaels exclusively. One of my favorite yarns to work with, and it patterns and stripes really nicely. And with this stitch you get little tiny eyelets, holes throughout your scarf, and they're staggered, and even though it's a flat panel, both sides of this stitch for this scarf are very attractive. So here's one side, there's another. As you can see, both sides are very nice looking, and with this yarn it just stripes beautifully. This is an eyelet stitch. I'm not exactly sure what type of eyelet stitch this is called. I've been calling this my tour scarf because I started working on this scarf with while I was traveling with my husband's band from Wisconsin to New York and back over a 9-day period. So it's kind of been lots of places with me, and I'm almost done with it, but I wanted to share with you how to do the 6 rows that make up the body of this stitch, and then I'm going to show you how I bind off as well. So like I said, there are 6 rows that you keep repeating over and over until you get the desired length of your scarf. Typically, you want your scarf to be about as tall or as long as the height of the individual that the scarf is going to be for. So I'm like 5'4", so I'm making this for me, and it's right around, I held it up to my head and it just about reaches my feet, so I'm considering that I'm at the point where I'm done. If it was for a taller individual or shorter individual, or if I wanted to wrap it around more times for like our frigid Wisconsin winters, I would then make it longer. But anyways, enough of the small chat. We'll start right on. To begin the scarf, what I did was I just did an E-wrap cast on, and I E-wrap casted on pegs 1 through 14, and then I did a row of purl, and then I started right with this 6 row stitch repeat that I'm going to show you now. So the first row, after you've done your E-wrap cast on and then your purl row, is that you're going to skip peg 1. You're not going to work this one. You've already worked it on your previous row, and this helps create these braided edges. I love using the slip stitch. As you can see, the edges give a nice braided look. I almost always use slip stitch edges on almost all of my flat panel scarves. It's rare when I don't. I just love how they look. It's a nice clean finished edge. So by skipping the first peg on each row and knitting the last peg of each row, you get that braided effect. So the first 2 rows are simply doing a row of knit, and we're using the E-wrap knit stitch, and then a row of purl. So row 1 is E-wrap. We're going to E-wrap pegs. We're not doing anything with peg 1, but we're E-wrapping pegs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. When it comes to 14, we're not going to E-wrap, but we're going to do a U-wrap, or instead of doing a, sometimes it's referred to as a half stitch, but we're not going to do it, we're not going to work from like a typical E-wrap, where we would go like from behind to the front. We're going to use it as like a turning peg, and we're going to do a U-wrap, bringing the working yarn to the front of the peg, and then behind and into the middle. So now that we've done the E-wrap on each one of the pegs and the U-wrap on the last peg, we can go ahead and knit off. I like to do from both ends, just so that it helps create an even tension. So I bring over my working yarn, I do some from this end, and then some from this end, working towards the middle. So now you've done the first row, which is just a skip stitch, E-wrapping pegs 2 to 13, and U-wrapping, doing a knit U-wrap stitch on the last peg 14. And now we're ready to begin row 2. And row 2 is a purl row. So what we're going to do is we're going to skip peg 14, and then we're going to purl pegs 13 to 2. And then the last peg, we're going to E-wrap. I find with purl rows, doing an E-wrap on the last stitch gives a more even edge. It matches the other side more. Just matches it better, giving it a nice overall look. So to do the purl stitch, we're starting here. We're skipping 14. We're not doing anything. Sometimes people will say skip or SK in a pattern. Other times people will say slip or SL. Basically all that means though is they're both the same things, you just don't work that peg. Other times you'll have patterns that call for you to work that peg. For this pattern we're not working the peg, first peg in the row. So the purl stitch, we're bringing our working yarn underneath the yarn in the peg, pulling it up, and we're creating this new loop. We're taking the loop that was off, the stitch that was off the peg, and putting that back on. Again, and I find it helpful just to sort of loosen that one stitch up. Working yarn goes below, and then you tighten it. And you keep doing the purl stitch, and if you need help with the purl stitch, there are videos that can show you a little bit more, slowly how to do the purl stitch. But this is row 2 of the eyelet stitch scarf, and we're just purling each peg. And again, we're doing 14 pegs on the square afghan loom by CinDWood with 5/8 inch gauge. You could also use a round loom and work as a flat panel, or a different gauge loom. If you wanted to use like a thinner yarn, the CinDWood 1/2 inch gauge looms would work as well. To use like a worsted weight yarn for this scarf. You could cast on more pegs or less pegs, depending on the width you wanted for the scarf as well. And so now we're back here. This is peg 1. We're purling peg 2. And then the last peg in the row, peg 1, we're doing an E-wrap. And we're knitting that and then bringing it over. So there we have completed rows 1 and 2. Now comes the fun part. For row 3, we're going to be we're skipping peg 1, we're E-wrapping peg 2, and then we're going to be doing a series of knit 2 togethers and yarn overs. The yarn overs are going to be flat yarn overs. We're not going to be E-wrapping, we're just going to be doing a flat stitch, which I'll show you as we go. But the first step is we're skipping peg 1. We're going to knit using the E-wrap peg 2, and then we're going to be knitting 2 together. So what we do is we bring the stitch, we want to knit 2 together on peg 3. So we're bringing the stitch from 4 over to peg 3 on top of that loom. See how there's 2 now, and this one's empty. And then we're going to be doing a yarn over on this peg. I find it helpful to just go ahead and move all the stitches that we need to knit 2 together. And since we're just doing a knit 2 together, yarn over, every other peg should have an empty one, and then the one next to it should have 2 loops on it. So you just bring it over and put it on top of the peg that was already there. And so I have 2 stitches on pegs 3, 5, 7, now 9, 10 is empty, 11 we're going to be doing a knit 2 together. So we're moving the stitch from 12 over to peg 11. 12 is empty. 13 we're going to be doing an E-wrap, and 13 we're going to be doing an E-wrap, and then 14 we're going to be doing a U-wrap. So now your loom is all set up to do the knit 2 together with the yarn over. So we already did the E-wrap on peg 2, and now we're just going to go, we're going to E-wrap, peg 3, yarn over. We're not going to work anything, we're just bringing the working yarn and laying it flat across the peg, E-wrap peg, the next peg, yarn over the empty peg, E-wrap the peg that's to the next side, yarn over the empty peg, E-wrap, yarn over, just your working yarn is going flat over, E-wrap the peg that has the 2 stitches on, yarn over the empty peg. Now we're going to E-wrap. This is now peg 13, and we're going to do a U-wrap on peg 14. Now we have all of our stitches ready to work over. I'm going to knit over this last peg just right away so that I don't unravel my work. And then I'm going to start from sort of both sides. You're bringing both bottom loops up over the top new one that you've created. The pegs that you've done the yarn overs on, you're not doing anything to these until the next row. And if you find that it's too tight to bring both of the stitches up over at once, you can do one at a time. But the main thing is you want to make sure that there's only one stitch that remains on those pegs that have the 2 loops. And so here we are at peg 3. Usually I start kind of going from back to forth to keep it even, but and you bring it down and you can see you've got the little staggered holes, or the eyelets, that were created from doing that row now. So that is the end of row 3, which was a row where we knit 2 together and do the yarn over using the flat yarn over. And now we're ready to begin row 4. Okay, and now we are ready to start on row 4. I just want to make sure that I have enough yarn available. Row 4, what we are going to be doing is a row of purl. We're skipping, again, like before, we're skipping the first peg in the row, and then we're going to purl each stitch up until your last stitch, which we're going to do an E-wrap knit stitch on. So this is peg 14. We're not doing anything to it. We're going to purl every peg left for the rest of the row. And just like I showed you before, to purl, you're bringing the working yarn under, pulling it up through, which is creating this new loop. You're taking the stitch off that was on before, lifting it to the back, and then pulling tight. And see, now you can see that the yarn overs from the previous row we are now working those. So we're just simply purling every stitch. Pegs 13 all the way to peg 2. And this is row 4. Here we're on peg 3, and we're purling. Peg 2, once again, we are purling that. And then peg 1, we're doing an E-wrap. So we're bringing the yarn from the back around to the front and doing the E-wrap stitch. And that completes row 4. Oops, excuse me. Trying to get better situated here. Row 5 is simply a row of E-wrap. We're E-wrapping pegs 2 to 13. It is the same thing we did for row 1, just like row 4 was the same exact thing we did for row 2. So we're E-wrapping each peg across the loom. Try to get a better angle just so you can, if you're not familiar with the E-wrap. And this is row 5. The last peg though, we're going to do a U-wrap, so we're bringing it from the front and to the back, or from the front to the back, back to the front. I like to knit this one over first, just so that if we let go, nothing unravels. And then every other stitch we just are working the bottom loop up over the top. And then we can just push it down. So that completes row 5. And now we are ready to begin row 6, which consists of skipping the first peg in the row, which, since we're working as a flat panel, first peg is going to be peg 14 if we're numbering 1 through 14. We're purling the first peg, and then we're going to be doing a set of purl 2s together and a yarn over. And so just like when we do the knit 2 together, we're going to be wanting to do the peg that's to our left, we want to purl these together, and then we're going to yarn over, which is going to be an empty peg. So what we can do is we can take the peg, this is the peg on 11, and bringing it over, keeping it twisted. That helps at this point if you've kept your stitches from the previous row loose, which I did not, but so you're bringing it over, and so now we have an empty peg. This peg we're going to want to purl 2 together on, so this stitch you can kind of just loosen it up, pull on it. This yarn is pretty forgiving, it's not going to snap, and we're taking it and we're bringing it over to the top of the peg. And you can go ahead and do all of them if you want, or you can do, I kind of find with the purling 2 together, it's easier once you've gotten a couple done to go back or to continue on. But then you just treat, when you're purling 2 together, you're treating this peg like you would normally purl, bringing your working yarn from behind, but you're bringing it up through both of the loops on the peg. And both loops then get taken up, back, and over, leaving just one stitch. And we're going to yarn over, just doing a flat yarn over this peg to the next. And again, we're purling. There's two stitches, so we're purling two together, treating them as if they were one. Bringing the stitch over. And now I'm going to go ahead and just move the remainder of the stitches over. I wrapped too tight. There we go. Like I said, it's helpful if you don't wrap too tightly, but if you kind of pull on the stitch on the peg, you can loosen it up. And then you just need to move it over onto the rest. The last peg in this row, we're going to purl, and then we're going to do an E-wrap on this peg. And so we're purling those two together. And if you can't get both of them, you can do them one at a time. And the empty peg, we're just doing the yarn over. We're just laying the yarn across, and then we're purling the next peg two together. And bringing your working yarn up through both of the stitches, taking those two stitches that were on the loom, just like a purl, except there's two, and bringing them up and over to the back of the loom. And you're going to purl the last peg for the row, which is peg 2. And then you're going to E-wrap peg 1. And now you can see we've got another set of eyelets that we've created. And now by simply repeating these 6 rows, you're going to get a scarf that has the eyelets like this. To finish off the scarf, I'm going to do row 1 and 2 again. Where I E-wrap, and then I'm going to purl, and then I'm going to do a super stretchy bind off. So after I do the row of the knit and the purl, I will show you how to bind the scarf off. Okay, I just completed another row for the scarf, doing a row of E-wrap and then purl. To finish the scarf off, I'm going to do one last row of E-wrap, skipping the first peg again, and U-wrapping the last peg. And we're going to bring each stitch over, Now if you wanted to, you could keep going so that both ends match up. I'm going to be ending on a pink row. For a more professional look, you'd probably want to end it so that both of the ends, like here I have started with the darker green and then it goes to the lighter green and the purple and the pink. You'd probably want to bind off where you with the same color, but this is just a scarf for me and it's perfect length right now, so I'm just going to go ahead and bind it off. Now that I've done the row of E-wrap, I'm going to do the super stretchy bind off. And to do the super stretchy bind off, typically what I do is I wrap my working yarn around the loom about 3 times, and then I cut. And for this scarf I used, you can see here is where I connected my, oops, where am I? Here in the scarf is where I connected my second skein, so it used about 1 1/4. I still have quite a bit of the Charisma yarn left. So to do the super stretchy bind off, your first step is you want to take your working yarn after you've cut it and you want to thread it through a yarn needle or tapestry needle. I really like the ones with the bent tips. Okay, so the first part of the super stretchy bind off is you're going to bring your working yarn and your tapestry needle up through the bottom of the stitch on peg 2, or I guess since we're working backwards, 13. Doesn't really matter. You're bringing it up through, and then you're going to bring it back down through the 2 loops that are on the first peg. And you want to make sure that it goes all the way under. Now we're skipping this peg. We're bringing it up. And sometimes if I have a problem with it being too tight, I just loosen it up a little bit. This yarn is kind of splitting on me. I'm bringing it up through the next peg. Down through both of the stitches on peg to the right. Keeping everything into the front. Skipping this peg, bringing it up. Try to get it in focus a little bit more for you. So we're bringing the working yarn up. And then back down, keeping the yarn always to the front of the loom. And you just continue with that process. We're skipping this peg now. We're going to the next peg over. We're bringing our tapestry needle does not want to cooperate with me today. And I actually usually work backwards, so for me this is really awkward. I usually hold the loom this way. So to show you how to do it, for me, kind of the correct way here is a little bit of a challenge for me. And then we're bringing it over. You want to keep the yarn to the front. Again, we're skipping the next peg, bringing our working yarn up through the top. Pulling tight. Back down through the bottom to the peg to the right. Moving over to the left, we're skipping this peg. We're bringing it up through this peg. And down. And you keep repeating this process until you get to your last peg, and I'll meet you when we get there. Okay, so now we're almost done with the row. We're moving the stitch up. And this would be peg 2, if we're counting 1 through 14 like I did in the pattern. Back down. Back down through peg 3. Now we're going to skip this peg 2. Move up through peg 1 on your loom. Back down through the 2 loops that remain on peg 2. And then for added security, we're just going to go back up peg 1 last time. And now you're ready to bring your scarf off the loom. Now your scarf is completely off the loom. You can kind of just snugly pull at this end here. And then you just simply take your yarn tail and you can just sort of weave it into your scarf. And I just sort of backtrack it. That's not what I wanted to do. And I just weave in my tail ends and kind of just work them in and hide them in the stitches that already exist. I'm just kind of following along with previous stitches that are done. It doesn't need to be perfect. You just want to weave it in and secure it. I usually go through a couple of the stitches and just sort of follow along. You can go back to front. Just sort of hidden. Once you've done a few of the stitches, I find it easy to follow kind of some of the garter rows when I'm weaving in ends, because those are kind of easy to hide your stitches in. So you're just weaving your working yarn tail through the scarf. So that it's nice and secure and that you can't really see. I like to try to put a small, I know a lot of knitters would not advise this, but I get paranoid about things unraveling, so I try to just sort of slip a little knot in somewhere along as I weave in my ends. And so I'm going to try to do that right here. I'm going to bring it through down here and just sort of back through this stitch that was already there. And just sort of pull on it so that there's a small and then I'll just sort of go back and then after I've done a few of those, you can see there's a little knot, but it's very unnoticeable and it's at the end of the scarf, and it just makes me feel a little bit more secure. It's probably not necessary, but if you weave it through enough times, you wouldn't need to do the knot. I just like to do a little knot so that I have some sense of security. And there you have the edge of your scarf. And you'll want to do the same thing if you've needed to use more than one skein of yarn. You'll want to weave in any other tails, secure them as well. Same with your starting row scarf. From your starting row, you just weave that in like I showed you just before, working that through. Like I said, I like to kind of work it through the garter stitches and then just try to like make a little small knot to help secure it. But as you can see, with the E-wrap cast on and the super stretchy bind off, you get a pretty, they're not exact, but the edges are very similar, and the more you kind of just like pull at them, the more they'll look similar, and the bind off doesn't create a very tight bind off. So that is how you do the eyelet stitch. And like I said, to start the scarf, I just E-wrap cast on, and then I did a row of purl, and then I started working the row 1 through 6 of the body portion of the scarf. And so then you have your easy eyelet stitch scarf. completed.